Kia ora everyone. I think we've got a quorum back at the table. So, to Councillor Darby's question, in the run-through we did traverse this, and yes, it has been asked if item 11 could be taken ahead of the notice of motions. Technically, that's possible, but I don't think that is, in my opinion, fair, but I don't think we've done it that way. So I think it's appropriate for the notice of motions to come first and then the item, and not switch that around. What the process will be is Councillor Lee will be able to open his notice of motion, talk about why he's doing it. This is on the first one, and this will take place on the second one as well. And then the committee will be able to ask questions of clarification of Councillor Lee, and then I will ask officers to come up to speak to the memo and answer questions of clarification from committee members. So just for clarification, when the resource consent that we can't really talk about because we're in appeals, that got approved, notified, I asked staff, Councillor Dalton and a couple of others, asked staff for a report to come to this committee on what we could do and what we could do long term, but also provide a memo to the committee when the appeals process was closed. In that time also we've had the notice of motions from Councillor Lee come through, and I think the memo talked to some of that as well. So bear with us when we try and navigate this quite tricky process, but we will go to Councillor Lee. You have your speaking time, Councillor Lee, to open this notice of motion.
Thank you. I will move accordingly that the Policy and Planning Committee request council staff to initiate a plan change to the Auckland Unitary Plan to make private helipads in residential areas a prohibited activity, and request council staff to apply to the Minister for an exemption to progress the above plan change. And I'll speak to it.
Thank you, Councillor. Yep.
Okay. This is an issue that the issue of helipads and their impact on residential areas is a relatively recent phenomenon that the council has been trying to deal with, but not adequately at this point. The concerns really became noticeable around about 2021 after a series of high-profile cases in the city, but also a flood of consents in the Gulf Islands. I understand there was quite a lot of media coverage in 2022, and in response, the council agreed that they would review the whole aspect of helicopters landing in private helicopters landing in residential areas by the end of the year. I was re-elected late in 2022, like you all here, and I raised the issue of prohibited activity and foreshadowed my intention to move accordingly at the very first meeting of this committee, Mr. Chairman, as an extraordinary item. In March 2023, the council brought forward its long-awaited review report regarding helipads, and there was a concession there to use a new noise standard for the Hauriki Gulf Islands. But essentially, the only change was an amendment that I managed to have carried, requesting staff to look at budget and the feasibility of a plan change for prohibited activities in residential areas, both for the city and for the Gulf Islands. At the end of that year, a report came back from the council in December 2023 saying it wasn't really, essentially, I won't quote it, it wasn't really feasible. Interestingly enough, the key expert that was quoted was John Stiles of the Stiles Group, who said, accordingly, we reached the conclusion that it would be difficult or impossible to establish a helicopter landing areas, to prohibit helicopter landing areas in residential areas. However, and that was the essence of the report, in response, the three local boards of Waitemata, Waiheke, joined Great Barrier in unanimously supporting prohibited activity. Prohibited activity has been in the Resource Management Act since 1991, and despite the multiple reforms and changes, and streamlining and all the rest of it, threats to get rid of it, which are always current and pending, it remained, despite all those changes, and for good reason. The matter of prohibited activity was taken to the Court of Appeal in 2007, and the Court of Appeal listed the reasons where prohibited activity councils could require certain activities or make certain activities prohibited. And I won't read them all out, but two of them are relevant, I think, to our business today. One is where a council takes a precautionary approach, and secondly, where it is necessary to allow an expression of social or cultural outcomes or expectations. Now, in the current Auckland Unitary Plan, there's numerous prohibited activities. They relate to subdivision in the Waitakere Ranges Heritage Area, the minimum size of subdivision lots in the urban area. It is in terms of modifying or destroying a wāhi tapu, prohibited. Discharging toxic substances into a water body, prohibited. Constructing landfills in high-risk erosion-prone areas, prohibited. Demolition of Category 1 heritage buildings, prohibited. And so it goes on. The release of GMOs into the environment, prohibited, and so on. So it is not the norm to prohibit activities, but it is a legal instrument that the council has every right to apply, and apply under terms of the principles and purposes of RMA, which talks about the central role under Section 5 of peoples and communities, and we've heard from peoples and communities this morning, and we've heard from them for quite a long time now, and also under the Local Government Act, which we swear to uphold when we all take office at the start of our terms. Purpose of local government: to enable democratic local decision-making and action on behalf of communities, to promote the social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being of communities. So not only do we have every right to prohibit an activity that is offensive to large numbers of people in the community, we're required to listen. And I think that's the key message today. in terms of, I know there's a lot of resistance in the system to this, but not in the community. And the system, the council, really, its mandate must come from the community. Its validity, its standing must come from the approval of Aucklanders. And so in terms of prohibiting activities, this one in particular, the fact of the matter is, over most of Auckland, landing helicopters in residential areas is prohibited. That's because most of the urban area is controlled airspace by the Civil Aviation Authority. The bit that's not is along the coastal edge, and that's where the problem is, and that's why the problem seems to be largely, but not entirely, it could be coming to a ward near you, but in my ward I've joked about how all the people submitting this morning, and it's the custom for the local councillor to move the motion of thanks and so on. I made a joke about that, but this is a community under stress. This is a community, whether it's along the Western Bays, whether it's on Waiheke Island or Aotea Great Barrier, all maritime areas of this maritime city. This is a community or communities under stress, and the council has a lot to do with it, whereby commission or omission. And here is an opportunity, after maybe 10 years, that the council can come to terms with this issue and deal with it in an appropriate legal way. Now, if we carry this motion today, that doesn't mean that everything is, all helipads are prohibited immediately. It just means a start of an open, legal, lawful process where everyone will have a say, everyone can make a challenge, and as the custom appears to be nowadays, this will be decided by independent commissioners. So what we're authorising today is a lawful process, an open process, a democratic process, and we're sending a signal that the council is listening to its community as it should, and in fact, as it must. And so what we're asking for today is generosity. Normally these processes are in the hands of highly paid professionals, and of course this costs the community a significant amount of money, but they've come to us, and for once here the elected members, democratically elected members of the governing body, can intervene and say, we've heard what the people are telling us, we're going to exercise our legal rights, and we're going to deal with this meaningfully and as it should be. Can I just run, before I close, I'm just going to run, if we can run through these slides. Currently, Auckland is not exercising best practice when it comes to the laws around landing aircraft in residential areas. And I've had a survey done, an open source survey of what happens all around the world. I'm quite happy to share it with members. But you can see all of these international cities, and all of them, the helipads, helicopter landing areas in residential or metropolitan business areas are prohibited, or at least highly unlikely, except for Auckland. And in the Hauraki Gulf, it's almost open slather. Can we look at the next slide, please? Global norm, concentrate helicopter movements at a single licensed facility. And we've heard from Quiet Sky Waitemata that there are about 6 or 7 heliports in Auckland. There are also all sorts of places where you can land in an emergency, as well as the hospitals. Noise and safety externalities. We hear a lot about noise, and we have experts, acoustic experts, arguing about how many dBs the noise level is and all the rest of it, but the safety externalities is never ever mentioned. International best practice is to treat landing aircraft in residential areas as a high profile when it comes to safety of its citizens. There is a legal precedent for this all around the world, and the unitary plan is the best way that we can deal with it. Civil aviation and the central government prohibit it over much of the urban areas of the country. We have a problem in the areas that are not controlled, and I think we need to take responsible action. Next slide, please. Okay, international case study, Sydney, New South Wales. The nearest city, really, we have to Auckland, and in many ways, our parent city. It was established by bureaucrats, officials who were sent by the government of New South Wales to set up Auckland. In many ways, not just through geography, Auckland in many ways mirrors Sydney, but obviously on a smaller scale. So what do they do there? In the Sydney Local Environmental Plan, LEP 2012, the land use table, land use zones in which a helipad is prohibited, general residential prohibited, neighbourhood prohibited, commercial core prohibited, business park prohibited, general industrial prohibited, enterprise corridor prohibited,
Councillor Lee,
and everywhere else it seems to be okay.
Councillor Lee, I'll just get
Thank
you to
you.
get to the next.
I will close now, Mr. Chairman, and ask my colleagues for their support. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Lee. Thank you very much, Councillor. First of all, we're going to have questions of clarification to you as the mover, and then we will move to staff advice if people want that on where we move to. So, Member Henare, are you wanting to? Yes, you are. Councillor Lee.
Kia ora. Mike, just a couple of questions. First one is about Ngāti Rehua and Ngai Tai and such. Over this particular motion or idea, has there been any engagement with locals, Māori?
Yes. The seconder of the motion, Board Member Henare, is a member of the tangata whenua of Auckland and the Inner Gulf Islands. In terms of Aotea, Ngāti Rehua have worked with the local board to fully support the local board aspirations to see helipads in residential areas or settlement areas prohibited.
Thank you. Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Lee, for bringing this. The last time you brought this, you had the words residential zones, and at the time I was trying to say, well, that overlooked a lot of other residential activity, and you've covered that off now by using the word residential areas. The other point that I made is there are other sensitive areas, non-residential areas, where significant environmental effects can be created by the arrival and departure of helicopters. Can you just, you've addressed the first part of my previous concern by changing the word from zones to areas, so that picks up places people live which aren't zoned residential, e.g. metro centres, etc. But have you considered asking for this plan change to be broadened to, or have you considered broadening it by possibly changing the words today to review the rules supporting, I think I'm correct in this regard, the balance would be in the non-complying activity status, reviewing the rules that support the non-complying activity status in other sensitive areas. Like just trying to give room for the staff to initiate a plan change that goes beyond just the residential areas, because my concern is those are of concern as well.
I think that's a very fair point, Councillor. You'll see that what we're trying to do is to align, to focus on residential areas where clearly there are obvious impacts in terms of people's well-being and also safety. So the effects are very significant in those intensified areas, and we support intensification. In terms of a broader aspect, currently in the unitary plan as we understand it, in rural areas for agricultural use, it's helicopters and helipads are permitted. And everyone understands that. For rescue and emergencies, it's okay. For private residential areas, which are not close, for private use, I should say, in rural areas, under the unitary plan, as we understand it, we'll put a little bit of question mark there, status quo ante, it's discretionary, as it was on Waiheke Island, and presumably Great Barrier, prior to the current district plan, and the discretionary items that needed to be considered under discretionary is that page, and that page. So it's actually reasonably gives a reasonable cover, I think. But I think residential areas at this stage is the best way to go, given how difficult, you must know how difficult it has been to get it this far, and the resistance to the change. People don't like change, other people are demanding it, and most people are demanding it. It's a case, I guess, of let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Great answer. Thanks, Councillor. Are there any other questions of Councillor Lee? Otherwise, we'll move to the staff. Cool, thank you. I'll just get staff members to come forward and you can speak to the memo and if there are questions of clarification on the notice of motion. We have Phil and Karina and Peter. Are there any? Yeah, so this can be based on the memo that we asked to be sent out for information, but also maybe on how the NOM would proceed, etc. Are there questions? I'm happy to ask one if there isn't one yet. The first of all, maybe it's to Phil, the likely cost of because obviously it's unbudgeted, but because it's across all residential zones, the cost of the process, and also if you could go a little bit into the likelihood, because of that previous advice that we got in the past on prohibited across such a blanket.
Right, kia ora koutou, everybody. Through the chair, so yes, just starting on the cost side of things. So if we were running a scenario of a prohibited activity status and we were focused on locations which would enable for the CAA regulations to be met, and so therefore focused on the coastal fringe locations from a residential point of view. I had our GIS staff do a little bit of work just to identify the number of owners and occupiers for doing the mail out on the basis of those parties being directly affected by the plan change. There's around about 150,000 properties which would fall into that category. Through some other work that we've been doing at the moment, we've been getting some quotes around the cost of doing mail-outs. And so we're looking at around about $400,000 for the mail-out component. Then, of course, there would be the other costs associated with the plan change, which come with the necessary experts that we need to have on board, the community engagement that we do, going through the commissioner process, and ultimately, if there are any appeals, ensuring that we cover those costs as well. So, in total, those costs could range somewhere between 1 and 1.5 million.
Thank you. So 1 to 1.5 million. Could maybe you go through the advice again, because we did support Councillor Lee's, well, I did, move forward to investigate a prohibited plan change, and then all the advice that came back to us was that we would not have experts to defend our position, and the likelihood was the independent commissioners would decline, even though, is that still the position of the council? If we move forward, of course we can choose to move forward, but if we move forward, the belief is we still would have, we couldn't defend it?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. So a blanket approach to a prohibited activity status across all residential zones is not something which I could recommend from an expert perspective. And there's a number of factors to that, so I might just go through what some of those things are. We probably do need to actually start with what is the current way in which the activity of helicopter flights for residential purposes occurs. And that includes the way in which our planning documents and consents in recent times have considered those. And so if we turn to the consent side of things first, which creates a little bit of a thread through to the Legacy Isthmus Plan, which was mentioned earlier as well. At a property in the Rise in St Heliers in 1990, there was approval given as a clifftop property for a helicopter landing pad. That resulted in a non-complying activity status that sat within the Isthmus Plan. It's not restricted discretionary, it's non-complying. Also at the same time, there was the second review of the Takapuna district scheme that was going on. And within that district scheme, it identified as a conditional use, which in modern day terms under the RMA is a discretionary activity, private helicopter landing pads on any residential site. That was appealed by Helitrans, which are a helicopter operator on the North Shore, who sought it to be a permitted activity. That was rejected by the Environment Court, although provision was made for their site by the treatment ponds to have special provision. Going further forward in time, there has been a resource consent that was given in 2018 on 74 Parata Drive in Airaki, which was for a temporary activity, utilisation of a helicopter landing pad, in order to be able to test manoeuvrability. That was approved as a discretionary activity, as the plan was at the time. And I'll just clarify that after that point, it was identified that it would be non-complying on the basis that it's not an activity provided for within the residential zones. Probably the next thing to then consider is the expert evidence itself. And so from a noise expert perspective, you're going to need to find a noise expert who's willing to provide evidence that on a blanket approach, that in no instances could an approval be given that could be conditioned in such a way to enable the effects to no longer be an adverse effect. Many of the experts that work within the noise space on the RMA side of things that operate within the Auckland area have been involved in various resource consent applications. And so it could well be very difficult to try and find a noise expert who's prepared on a blanket basis to provide expert evidence to say that in no instance, on no residential property, would there be a situation of where, through conditions, those effects could be managed. Then it comes to finding a planner who's prepared to support this as well. And again, that could well be a difficult test to find. If we were to assume that those people were found, then we need to actually consider what other types of locations and contexts around Auckland for residentially zoned land could potentially have these things occur in such a way where the conditions could be managing the effects so that they are no longer adverse. And so I've done a little bit of work just looking around the coastal environment of the urban Auckland area, and as well as some of the locations where there have been applications for consent, and we've had those on Stanley Point, we've had them through Herne Bay. There are other sites around Auckland where the distances between dwellings is substantial. And so there are locations on Cape Horn Road in Hillsborough and in Clifton Road in Hillsborough, where we have properties that are respectively 257 and 140 metres from the next neighbouring property. And if we are to take a blanket approach to prohibited activity status, we need to be able to cross that bar of in no instance can there be any application that can be received. Because remember, with a prohibited activity, you're not allowed to make an application for a resource consent. So those would be factors that we'd need to consider as part of seeking a prohibited activity status on a blanket basis. And yes, there's been a number of cited other rules that sit within the unitary plan. And yes, the Coromandel Watchdog decision does remain the preeminent decision from the courts, setting out some of the clauses by which you can secure prohibited activity status. I've had a bit of a look through some of those clauses as well. And yes, potentially the closest one would be the cultural values aspect, where the nuclear power stations one is referenced. So in that category would be potentially the closest one. The precautionary approach, in this case, the locations are known, the effects are known. It's not a situation where the science is unknown. And many of the other clauses relate to things such as water takes and aquaculture, which are not appropriate in this one.
Thank you. I'll go to other questioners. I've got a couple more, but they may be covered by others. Councillor, sorry.
I might just add just a little bit more. Probably one of the other things to consider is in more modern times under the RMA, through other district plans in New Zealand, where has this been entertained? And we did do a bit of work into the Wellington City Council district plan that's just been made operative. And within that plan, it's actually a permitted activity across all residential zones for helicopter landing pads on the basis that the noise limits are met. And those noise limits are very similar to what we've got. If, however, they're not met, then it reverts to a discretionary activity. So I just wanted to add that in as another more recent example of the way in which the RMA has considered this.
Thank you. Councillor Leone.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to kind of go back to the plan change and again what the implications would be if, for example, this notice of motion did go through. So, I mean, what we've heard about Minister Bishop and the review of RMA. So, I mean, what would the outcome be of the council and the implications of that if it was actually won today?
Through the chair, we've only got a fact sheet from Minister Bishop to go off in answering that question. So we are yet to see any amendment paper introduced to the amendment bill that's going through to see what the exact wording is. But if I can answer you based on what the fact sheet says, it does list certain exceptions that can continue on and also a timing position of what can continue on. Everything else that's to continue on is through discretion of the minister, and there is no clarification given as to what the considerations should be by the minister in that decision. So we can only really look at then what the exceptions are, which are provided for things to continue, and they tend to be focused on things which are either enabling of housing, continuing on a planning process, which is one which is a stipulated Schedule 1 process, being a streamlined planning process, implementing agreed terms of treaty settlement, or a natural hazard-based plan change. So from those exceptions, I'm not sure how noise would be able to sit. I suspect it would actually fall under the general exception clause of where the discretion sits with the minister. And yeah, beyond that, I'd be speculating as to how it's considered.
So just maybe I'll get Megan to maybe clarify. whatever we decide today, I'll just get Megan to clarify, would be implemented by staff. They're just warning us that we may not have experts' advice, but whatever decision is made will be taken. And the other one is, Megan, if you want to talk about, you've tried to get advice from Ministry for the Environment and around, there's likely to be a triaging in our assumptions around that, such as evidence provided, but we don't know.
Thanks. Through the chair, I just wanted to make it really clear, and happy to talk about this at any point, but we want to make it really clear that while we were providing advice, and we have, we will always implement a decision of the council. So notwithstanding our advice to say that we do not support prohibited activity status, if a decision is made to request us to do a plan change, we will do so. We might struggle, and there might be a time where we come back to you and say, look, we've tried and we can't, or there are certain elements that we're not sure we can do. But nonetheless, we will absolutely implement it, okay? So please don't hear any set of recommendations or advice from us to say that therefore we will not be doing something that you might decide that you want us to do. The second element, as the chair has said, I have spoken with officials from the Ministry of the Environment around the minister's press release. Look, there is no process yet, but it is likely that there'll be some kind of requests like, what is your plan change? What are you intending to do? Why is it important for Auckland, or why is it important to the community? What are other options? I can imagine it'll be those kind of questions, but we don't know yet.
Thank you. Can I just get two more questions? The second question, and you may not be able to answer this, but I thought I'd just raise it anyway, was around what it does cost us as a council every time, in terms of the legal side of things, every time we have to go to environmental court. I mean, is there a figure that we are aware of that does, is kind of like the average cost?
Yeah, through the chair, and it does relate to item 11 within the agenda rather than the memo, but there's a table which sits within there, and the first row of that relates to the cost associated with the different options, and there's a figure in there for full involvement in an appeal of about $200,000. Now that relates to a consent. When it comes to a plan change, the costs can be more. There are often more parties that are involved. And the application of the plan change obviously is broader, and so therefore the context needs to be provided through expert evidence more fully. So yes, costs could well be north of that.
Thank you, because I mean, obviously I'm just also weighing up, the future costs that it could be to council every time we go back to the environmental court when it's challenged. So obviously if it's 5 times, that's could easily be $1 million that we'd spend on that. The last question that I had, and I know has already been kind of talked about, is your understanding of the environmental implications of obviously helicopters here in Auckland. Do you have any, is there anything that you can give us in terms of the data and information on that?
So, giving my professional opinion with respect to helicopter landing pads, I support the position that only in exceptional, almost unique situations within residential areas can the effects be managed to the extent of enabling them to occur. I see that the separation distances need to be substantial. I see that the impacts upon recreation, particularly where there are bathing beaches beneath, can be substantial, and I know the degree of community interest of these. So in a personal capacity, I've been involved in a notified application for a helicopter landing pad across the road from myself, and in considering all of the information that came in on that application, I took a position and was opposed to that application, and I did have a view that in particular the impact upon safety of those that are recreating directly below the flight path as it's coming in over the cliff was a reason that I got involved in that application.
Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Chair, Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, and I think Megan has probably answered my question to some extent. There were some questions, there were some comments about staff actually not wanting to do this, and I just wanted to get that clarified. Now, what you've said is you'll absolutely do whatever we agree to. The advice that you give us is, and I think what you just said too, is that we do not support prohibition or the prohibited activity. Perhaps just clarify that particular point. Is that, because I wasn't sure, is that a legality, or is it an RMA, or is it why is your advice not to support a prohibited activity?
Through the chair, let me start and then I'll pass back to the team. So yes, that is not our recommended approach for prohibited, and the team will explain why, and it is based on, you know, the legal context in which we work in New Zealand, and, you know, and an experience we've had. And just secondly, to confirm again, that is just our recommendation that if a decision is made against that or requiring, say, prohibited activity plan change, for example, as the NOM is requesting, then we will do that work, but we will also come back to you or be honest with you if we're struggling from a legal perspective to kind of get that over the line. But we'll work with you and we will implement that decision. Team, thanks.
Through the chair, just from a legal perspective, for prohibited activity status, we would have to establish with the support of experts that prohibited activity status is the most appropriate activity status. And our advice to you is...
I'm struggling to
If you just want to pull the mic closer to you, Karina, sorry.
Sorry. Through the chair, from a legal perspective, the council needs to prepare a Section 32 evaluation report in support of any plan change. In doing so, if we were to try and support prohibited activity status, we would need to be saying that prohibited activity status is the most appropriate activity status to give effect to the objectives and policies in our planning document. And our advice is that it is not the most appropriate activity status.
And just to add to that, because in order to consider something prohibited, you would need to be saying that there would be under no circumstances anywhere at any time would you ever be able to consider that activity would be appropriate. And we don't think that bar is too high. We don't think that would apply to helicopters. Again, that's we're sitting here in the legal context in which we work here. Hence, the next one below there is non-complying, and that's what we have in the plan. The Rawene decision is now questioning that and saying actually that's wrong. It's permitted. That's a slightly different situation which we deal with in the report and the memo. But that is why we're not recommending. It's not because we don't think there are effects to be considered with helicopters. There absolutely are. We are concerned we can't hit that bar, that really high bar that the law sets.
And you can't hit that high bar because you need experts to be able to attest to those effects of being a prohibited activity.
That's right. And the advantage of the experts' involvement, of course, is their ability to understand what may well be all of the measures that could be taken to condition a consent in such a way as to enable it to no longer have adverse effects. So it is a very high bar to cross. And remember, prohibited activity status is denying the ability of anybody to make an application. And so, therefore, the tests are very high.
So non-complying allows a consent to be considered. Non-complying is greater than noise in terms of looking at the effects, isn't it? So it's not just a noise issue.
Yeah, and this is where we can probably clarify what the activity is and what the standards are. So we're talking about the activity itself of what can occur within any particular zone. And at the moment, Yes, the Commissioner's decision was that it was a permitted activity that was innately or inherently, I think was the word, associated with a residential use. The standards themselves set up your ability to continue to actually have that activity status. And so if you've got a permitted activity within the activity table and you meet the permitted standards, you retain your overall permitted activity status. And so the focus of the conversation today is really around the activity table and the way in which it treats the activity of helicopter landing pads. The standards themselves, they remain set through New Zealand standards.
Can I just add there, the situation is slightly different in the Hauraki Gulf Island with the Hauraki Gulf Islands plan, but in that, with a restricted discretionary activity status for helipads initially, it does specify a noise limit, and that noise limit reflects the New Zealand standard, and that's where our noise experts have said, for example, that standard, the New Zealand standard, it sort of sets a level at which you have acceptable levels of noise that aren't going to affect amenity or protection of public health and the environment. So that's where we have the issue. Well, where our experts say, as long as you're meeting that standard, then you're not having those effects on public health and so on in the environment. So it's a slightly different thing in that the standard is in the act. You have to meet that standard to be a restricted discretionary activity in the Hauraki Gulf Islands plan.
Chair, are we sort of dabbling in item 11 at the same time, or just sticking to the norm at the moment?
It is connected, so I'm happy if you have a question on that.
I'm just trying to find the most effective way forward in terms of the practicalities of plan change goes in, it takes up to 2 years. We're saying perhaps, we can't reach the bar of prohibited. That's the advice. So then what? It fails, then we come back to where we are today. What is the most efficient, effective way to get the outcome that everybody is looking for?
So yes, this probably does talk to item 11 within the agenda. So the recommendation from that item is that there is a dual approach which is taken. So in reflection of the officer's current interpretation of the plan being non-complying activity, that we seek from the court by declaration confirmation of that. The advantage of that aspect of the recommendation is that it provides clarity to everybody, rather than the uncertainty that could well exist at the moment for those that choose to take an interpretation of the recent decision that's been made, compared to the way in which council officers treat these applications when received. The second part was to initiate the development of a plan change, but to report back to committee at the point that a decision has been reached by the Environment Court on the declaration. The advantage of that aspect is that if the Environment Court see the plan in the same way that we as officers see it, and that it is actually a non-complying activity, then we retain choice for whether we proceed with the plan change. If the Environment Court come back and see that, no, actually, it is actually a permitted activity, then there is no wastage of time which has occurred in the research that staff have been undertaking, and the movement towards the notification of a plan change to set a different activity status could move more swiftly.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Phil, my last question is just around, it's a little different, it's just a curiosity. Under Minister Bishop's advice, potentially could the current Hauraki Gulf's plan change be paused, or is it too far along now?
Through the chair, based on the information that we have to hand, noting that it's an announcement at this stage, I would anticipate that we would need to withdraw that unless we were granted an exemption to carry on.
Thanks, Karina.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Chair. This is all very complicated, isn't it? I'm going to try and ask my questions for the benefit of not just you, Chair, but for the people reporting this and the people in the room. So if you voted, if we vote for this notice of motion by Councillor Lee and Leone, is it true we are not guaranteeing that private helipads in residential areas will be permitted? I mean, I think what I'm trying to ask you is these people have come today, they want it prohibited, they think the notice of motion will do that. Is that true? Just a yes or no. Megan?
The answer is no.
Yeah. Okay, concurrently, though, if you vote against the notice of motion, that doesn't mean that there can be private helipads anywhere in any residential area in Auckland either, does it? Yes or no?
Correct, it does not mean that.
Right.
Yep.
So noting that, I'm now trying to help Aucklanders understand where we're going here and how we can achieve the best. Sorry, let me just rewind. So the argument is basically legal, isn't it? It is all around the definition of prohibited. I mean, it's almost an academic argument that has to be resolved before we can get anywhere. Is that correct? Because from where I see it, prohibited is things like explosives, mining and farming of stoats. You know, it's a pretty high bar, right? So is it true that we actually have to get more clarification or understand how difficult it would be to change that prohibited definition or seek clarity of it? That's the first thing we need to do. Would that be correct?
Through the chair, and I'll just check with the team, I don't think we need any further clarification on how hard it would be. We have...
So you're saying it's hard?
We've advised you that we don't believe it'll be very difficult, if not impossible, to hit that mark, hit that bar of prohibited. I don't think there's anything more we can say to that. Yeah.
Okay, so if it's too high to meet and you're not going to meet it, why therefore wouldn't it be better to leave the notice of motion and move to the direction that you're suggesting, potentially the D option? And I'm sorry, Chair, I'm just trying to get to the answer.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get to the fastest, fastest way of achieving what we want to do here.
I just want to make sure the staff aren't being brought into exactly the debate. So maybe, that's fine. But I think asking Phil to tell us to move to the next is a bit hard. But he may be able to say why item 11 is there. Yeah.
So, sorry, I apologise if I've gone. You know, I'm just trying to resolve this in the best way, to let the people of Auckland really understand what's happening here, all right? So
maybe I'm happy to answer the question. So the notices of motion were brought, or Councillor Lee advised them a wee while ago, and then around about the same time as the deliberate or the decision from the independent hearings panel happened on Rawene. And so the notice of motion is not, doesn't necessarily state it's relating to Rawene, but clearly that's the part of the context. We felt that if we put a report which just provided some advice to the council on what one could do about the Rawene situation, it stays within the context of the notice of motion, but it allows Councillor Lee to put his notice of motion in for you to consider that quite appropriately. Depending on what happens with that, you may or may not be subsequent decisions you might want to make. The report just enables you to do that. We also set out the memo just to enable this kind of conversation, just to provide you all the information, but we didn't want to cut across Councillor Lee's notice of motion, so that's not what we're trying to do. We are just trying to enable him for that matter to be discussed, and then should there be any subsequent decisions that you may need to make, that report allows you to do that as well, whether it's the recommendations of the staff or otherwise. But we do believe that there is, particularly in the declaration element, that option is a good option to take in the meantime, because at the meantime we still have a disagreement or a lack of clarity around the activity status of helicopters, and that can be done as well as any plan change or whatever might happen with the NOM decision.
So just a question around that again. So if the NOM went through, would that mitigate or stop us doing the next item?
Through the chair, the option of, say, a declaration, for example, to deal with the current situation we have is still open to you, so you can still make that decision, even if the NOM went through, as per. Some of the other things wouldn't be quite so relevant because there would now be a decision to do a prohibited plan change. But certainly the declaration would still be open to you if you felt that it was helpful to deal with the situation that we currently have in front of us around the interpretation of the unitary plan.
And can I just get a clarification around the minister's role in this? Because he said no plan changes and that kind of stuff in his latest press release. So if we went ahead with this, he could still say no, couldn't he?
Yeah, it would appear, so as far as we can tell, having it being a press release and a fact sheet, it sounds like we would need to ask for some kind of exemption, and Councillor Lee's recognised that. He's kind of guessing the same as we are, that it's likely to be the case. And if the Minister doesn't believe that it fits the criteria that finally goes into the Resource Management Act, then I presume, yes, the answer would be no, we can't do it. So we kind of, I was going to say the word prohibited, possibly not the right word, we would be unable to, for example, implement the plan, the NOM, should that go through. Yep.
And if we left the NOM and went on to the staff suggestion, he doesn't have a say.
So if in that report we recommend a declaration, for example, no, that's not a plan change, so he wouldn't have a say in that. That's entirely your decision. If we did also look to at least initiate a plan change or start the preparation of that, again, that's not his decision. It is, though, if a decision was made, to do a plan change. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people asking questions. I did promise everyone we would move to lunch at 12:30, and I know that some people have planned calls and different things. Councillor Darby had to leave because of that promise. We're going to do the awkward thing of going for a half-hour break. We need the staff to have a break as well. It's the right thing to do. I may just go to Councillor Fully, and then at 12:45 we will have a half-hour break to 1:15 and come back for the rest of the questions. I know that that is long, but this debate is complex, and we need to make sure we do it properly. So, Councillor Fully.
Kia ora, thanks, Chair. I'll keep it really quick. I just wanted to know from staff, if the NOM goes ahead, what are we talking about in terms of consultation, in terms of going out to the public? How much of an opportunity will there be for the wider community to have their say on this?
Through the Chair, the plan change would be following the normal process under Schedule 1, which requires under Clause 3 that we go through and do consultation, and through Clause 4A that we do our iwi consultation. There is choice for us around the extent to which we carry that out. Certainly on plan changes in recent times where there have been wide-scale or significant implications on rights associated with the plan changes, then we have, in addition to stakeholder engagement and those types of engagement activities, we've released the draft version of the plan change and invited informal feedback on that, and been able to make improvements from a wide-scale involvement process, which is in a non-statutory phase before proper notification.
Kia ora, thanks, Chair. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Yes, so we will go, everyone will stay in order of questions. Councillor Ferry will be first after the break, and then we will go into questions. We will be, unfortunately, having to delay our mana whenua reps till after this debate. So we will move to... Yes. All right. To the, oh yeah, the list after lunch? Yes, okay. And, oh, councillor Walker, you would like electronic attendance? Yes, please. To, okay. I will move, so you're leaving now to go? Oh, right.
Now, but I'll be leaving later, but
Okay,
almost certainly,
cool. I'll see.
before this meeting concludes.
Okay.
So that will be.
If you're at the local board meeting, you probably can't be at this meeting. Okay. Okay, Councillor Turner will be added to the list as well. Councillor Walker will move and Councillor Turner second to add them to the online. All those in favour? Any opposed? No. Okay, we will adjourn for a half an hour break. We'll be back at 1:15 and we'll continue those questions. Sorry, Mr. Staff.